In my first video on Microsoft Entra Custom Authentication extensions, I showed you how external claims can be added to a Microsoft Entra Identity token. In this video, I will provide you with a deep dive into configuring all the required components. You'll learn how to request a token, call out to a workflow before the token is issued, create an API and workflow using Pipedream, and add the appropriate claims to the token. I'm showing you a lot of tips and tricks in this video. It's a deep dive, so stay tuned. Our first task is to identify the required components. Hopefully you've watched my previous video on understanding custom authentication extensions. But just in case you haven't, or maybe you need a recap, let's just explain what custom authentication extensions are. So we have a user who goes to access an application, and the first thing that will happen is we go to the application to sign in. The application says you're not authenticated and sends you up to Entra ID. And we arrive at Entra ID with an authentication string. Entra ID authenticates us, and the next thing that happens, and this is the custom authentication extension, is we can have a token issuance start event. Here we now call out, or Entra ID calls out to an API. That API can do whatever it needs to do. So it could go to any system of record, retrieve additional claims about the user. Well, when Entra ID calls the API, it sends the user details. That's the user who's just signed in. So we retrieve additional claims about the user from external systems of record, and then what we do is we return those additional claims. At that point, Entra ID augments the token with those additional claims and then replies back to the user, who in turn sends that token to the application. Of course, there are slightly different flows that can be involved, but that's the basic flow. Okay, so let's look at the components involved, because in this video we're going to dive in deep and actually look at managing all of the components so we can get this working in a demo environment. So we have a request token, we have a call out to a workflow, we have a workflow which is actually been created in Pipedream, and I'll show you exactly how to create it in Pipedream, and then we add the claims to the identity token, and that's the process. So we're going to start by requesting a token. So this is this piece here. Now what we do is we go to the authorization endpoint, and here we have a string which says please authenticate the user to this application. So the first thing that will happen is the user gets authenticated, and then Entra ID will want to reply with the token. And what I've done here in my demo environment is said, I don't have a physical application. So I actually tell Entra ID to reply to jwt.ms. Which will display the token. So we're actually directing to this website which displays the token and renders it back so we can see the token contents. So how do we do that? Well, I'm in the Entra portal, and the first thing I need to do is do an app registration. Because although I don't have a physical application, I still need a registered app within Entra ID for Entra ID to issue a token for that application. So I go register the application, I give it a name. In this particular case, I've called it Get Token, and I need to select a platform. It's a web platform, and here's the trick. I'm going to say reply to jwt.ms. Right, so that's where the reply is going to go back to. Now I'm going to register that app, and because I want the token to pass back through the browser, so I want from the authorize endpoint, I want the token issued. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to use ID token used for implicit and hybrid flows. If I don't do this, the token will not be issued and will not flow back through the browser. So I select that option there. I'm going to save it. So that's configured the app for me. So we go to the overview. The first thing I can do is I can pick up the client ID. So I'm going to replace the client ID in here. This, by the way, this file is available to you on GitHub. And if you look in the description, you'll see a link to the GitHub resource. So that's the client ID. The next thing is I need the endpoint. So this is where I need to go to get authenticated by Entra ID. So I'm going to pick up an endpoint and I'm going to drop it back into here. So that's the endpoint. Now let's have a look at this. What we've actually got is we're saying to Entra ID, go to this endpoint, authenticate the user for this application, respond with an ID token, and redirect the response to JSON-WebToken.ms. The scope is OpenID, which says get an OpenID Connect token, and the state and the nonce values I'm not going to cover in this video, but I put in silly values in there. They should be unguessable random numbers. So I'm going to grab that lot, and I'm going to just use join line, which puts it all in one line. Now I've got spaces in here that I need to get rid of, so we can see a space there, and I'm going to simply do a replace, and I'm going to replace a space, and there's 6 of them, and just run the replace on that. So that's got rid of that. So I'm doing this in Visual Studio Code. Next job is to grab this string, and I need to pop that into a shortcut so I can actually invoke this URL. So just drop that whole URL into the shortcut, give it a name, and I'm going to call this in here get token, and that's done. So now I double click that and it asks me to sign in, and I'm going to sign in as my user John. And this time, because it's the first time I've used this application, it's asking me to consent. Now, I could have consented with admin consent, but I'm just going to accept this. So I'm consenting as a user. And having done that, I get my token back and it's displayed. And if we look at here, I actually showed you this in the first video, but we've got JSON or JWT.ms hash. So it's coming back as a hash fragment, identity token, and there's the identity token itself. Now, if I look at this token, it's a very minimalistic token because I didn't tell it to bring back profile or email or anything else. So all I really have is a subject identifier. So it's not obvious this is John, but that's got me a token back. Now, if I could have changed the scope and got a richer token back, but it would have been claims from Entra ID, from my tenant. Okay, so the next job would be to call out to workflow, but I don't have a workflow yet, so I'm going to use Pipedream to create that workflow. Now, rather than Pipedream, I could have used an Azure function. The one thing I'm not checking in Pipedream is when the call out to workflow happens, the HTTP request actually has in there, in a header, an access token. In my Pipedream workflow, I'm not validating that token. So this is purely for demo purposes. So let's go and actually look at that in terms of creating the workflow. So there's my API, and when it gets called by Entra ID, I will get full user details. So what I need is to be able to receive all those user details, and then I need a piece of code that is going to retrieve additional claims from a system of record. And then I'm going to return those additional claims. We need to summon up Pipedream, and we can get a free account with Pipedream. So pipedream.com, go in there, and I'm actually already signed in, and I'm going to do create a project. We need to give it a new project name, and I'm going to use get token claims API for the project name. I'm going to create the project, and the next thing I want to do is I want to create a workflow within the project, and I'm going to use the same name for the workflow. So we'll go and create that workflow. And now what we want is what the trigger is that triggers the workflow. And we're going to use an HTTP request for doing that. And I'm going to go in here. The event data is going to be a full HTTP request. And I want to change the response. Rather than just returning a straightforward HTTP 200 OK from that, what I want to do is run a piece of code. So I'm going to return a custom response from your workflow. Okay, so that's created that. So I'm going to save and continue on that. And there is my API that I can call. So I have a public URL that I can now call. So that's there. I can generate a test event and test this if I want to by sending a particular request body. So we can see that we've sent a particular request body, and you can do testing. You can do lots of amazing things in Pipedream. Okay, so after the trigger, I click on the little plus sign, and then I can add the next step. And the next step is going to be some Node.js code. So I'm going to say run code. Now, we need this code. And what I've done is I've actually put this code for you on GitHub. The URL for GitHub is in the description. So we go over there and we get token.js, and I'm just going to copy all of this. And having copied that, I'm going to paste that into here. Now, this is purely demo code. Don't think it's good programming practice or anything else. This is code. It works for the sake of the demo. So now what we've got is we've got the trigger, and then we've got the code that will run. And if we look at the code itself, what it does is it produces some claims, and rather than calling out to a SQL store or some other system of record, it's just hard coding the claims values. But for testing this is absolutely fine. So I'm going to deploy this now. So that is now going to be available. So that has got my Pipedream API and workflow deployed. If this video is helping you learn, please help to promote my channel. Like the video, click subscribe, and ring that bell to get notified. Our next job is to call out to the workflow. So we've got to instruct Entra ID to do this. So let's remind ourselves where we are in the flow. So we've requested authentication, we've authenticated our user, and now we need to have a token issuance start event which calls the workflow. The workflow does its business, returning the additional claims, and at that point Entra ID will augment the token. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, we go back to the portal, and we're going down in the portal to external identities, and we're looking under here for custom authentication extensions. And we come in here and we create a new custom extension, and we need to go through this particular wizard. Our first thing is we need to choose the event, and it's a token issuance start. There is only one event at the moment, but remember this is in preview. There may be more events in the future. So we're going to choose that event, and then we're going to call out to our workflow. So we need to specify a name to start with. So I'm going to call this get token claims. My target URL is going to be the Pipedream URL that I copied earlier. We've got a timeout, which is how long it will wait before the API responds, and then we got a maximum number of retries. So we'll leave those at their default values. Go next on there. Our next job is to set up API authentication. Now, when we call out to the API, what Entra ID will do is it will set an access token in the header. To be able to do that, we need to define an app that Entra ID can use to get the access token. So we're going to go create a new app registration. Again, we give it a name. So we're going to call it Token Claims API. And it's going to require a particular permission, which I will come back to in a moment. So we click Next on there. And then we need to specify the claims that our API is going to return. So we need to go and grab those claims. Now, again, I put this file on GitHub just to make your life easier. So we're going to get back a correlation ID. So we pop that in there. And our next one is an API version. Again, pop it in. And date of birth. And then we've got custom roles. And finally, we have UPN. So that's to find the claims we're going to get back. Okay, we can review this and then we create it. So now it's actually creating this custom extension, which will trigger the call out to our workflow. So what we've got is a summary here. So our essentials are, number one, it's done on a token issuance start event. And then what it's doing, it's calling out to this particular API with the appropriate timeouts. If we have a look at the authentication, we can see that the authentication is set up for an app with an ID of B29E. That app is the one we've just created. So now, oh, look, up comes grant permissions. We need to grant permissions for the app. So I'm going to actually go to the application itself rather than clicking on that grant permissions button. And I'm going to have a look at the API permissions. And in some ways, these are a little bit strange. Because rather than being a permission for this application to access something else, it's a permission for custom authentication to be able to receive the payload. So that's the permission, and we need to grant consent. Now, this app, remember, was created automatically for us. The bit we do need to do is grant the admin consent. So I'm going to go for that. And now the consent has been granted and we're all ready for the next step. And our next job is to actually tell Entra ID to add these external claims for a particular application. So how do we do that? Well, we need to actually do some claims mapping. So we're going to map claims to the token. And we do that, and that setting is in Entra. So let's go into Entra. Let's find our application, which, if you remember, was get token. So this is the application that is getting the token. So we'll search for it, and there it is. And we come in here, and we go to single sign-on. And we're looking for attributes and claims, and we're going to edit that. And if we go to the advanced settings, we can tell it here to actually use a custom claims provider or our custom authentication extension. So we're going to configure that, and we're going to choose our custom claims provider, which is this one here, which is get token claims. So we'll save that. So now we're saying for this application, we want you to call out to get token claims. Our next job, of course, is what claims do we want back? So we're going to do a claims mapping here. So I'm going to use correlation ID. So we're going to pop that in there. That is going to be the name of my claim. And I'm going to choose from the custom claims provider the correlation ID. So we add that one in. Our next job is to do it again with the API version. So we'll do that. We're going to do it again with the date of birth. So we'll select the date of birth, and then again custom roles, and we can also get back our UPN. So I'm going to add in UPN in there. And it says, oh, the claim type's restricted. So we can't use the name UPN in our augmented token. So we're going to have to choose a different name. So I'm going to use in here user principal name. So we've got user principal name, and I'm going to choose this one here. So it's coming from my custom claims provider .upn, but actually in my augmented token that's going to be issued by Entra ID, UPN is a reserved name, and I'm going to have to use user principal name in there. So that's fine. And lastly, what I want to do is actually add in one more. So I'm going to add one more new claim, and in here I want the display name, and I'm going to add the display name into the token. If you remember, when we first issued this token, it didn't have a display name in it. So now this is my chance to add it. So I'm going to choose from here user.displayname, and that will end up in the token. So we'll save that. And that has now completed my instruction to Entra ID to augment a token for the get token application and add these particular claims into the token. So the next job is to test all of this out. So we're going to go end to end, request a token, and see what claims we actually get back. I'm going to use my link that I created earlier. So we're going to go back to our custom extensions folder, do get token, and let's see what happens. So it's whirling away a little bit. Oh, and it's failed, and non-retrievable error has occurred. Now, this is something that quite often happen when you haven't used your Pipedream API for a while. It takes time to fire it up again. So let's try again. So we'll just go in and do it again. And this time, oh, it's got this application is required to be configured with an application-specific signing key. Now, this is a protection that's put in place because normally, Entra ID is totally responsible on its own for putting the claims in your token, and then it signs it with a global signing key. The problem is when you make a call out, you're going to another source of authority to provide claims. And the recommendation is to have a signing key which is specific to that application. Now, in my example, I'm going to get around that by changing the manifest. So I'm going to go into my app registration for my key, and we're going to come down here to get token, and I'm going to go to the manifest, and I'm going to accept map claims, and I'm going to set that to true. Now, should you do this? Well, the decision is yours. It's if the external claims provider is within your org, then maybe you're okay using a global signing key. But certainly with a multi-tenant app, absolutely not. Anyway, I've put a link in the description, and you can have a look at that about the security considerations. So I'm going to go here and leave that as true. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to the get token, and we'll go in, and the application required to be configured application-specific signing key. Oh, well, it's probably a time lag on that, so we'll go back again and just do that once more, and this time we have our token back. And what we've got in here is we've got our custom roles, we've got our date of birth, the API version, the correlation ID, and we've even got the display name and our user principal name. So yes, it's all worked, which is absolutely great. Thanks for watching this session to the end. I hope you enjoyed the level of technical detail and tips and tricks. Don't forget to subscribe and keep learning. Please leave your comments below. I'll see you next time in the cloud. Thanks for watching my channel. Subscribe for more free training. You might like to join me for my Identity Masterclass. Hopefully, see you soon.